I don't know about your family, but in my house, there are crazy things that are said all the time. Those things that when they come out of your mouth and they just, like, as soon as they've left or even before they're completely out of your mouth, you think, hey, I'm not sure I ever imagined myself saying that. You know what I'm saying? Like my wife and I were just kind of thinking through this, and just in the last few days, here are just some of the random, non-important, crazy things that we say. Like we're watching a movie and we just said, he's just a guy wearing makeup, right? That phrase has all kinds of applications in Las Vegas. We were watching The Goonies and they were kind of freaking out about Chunk's big crazy friend. I forget his name, but here's the thing. Did you put your name on your paper? We only ask that about 1,000 times a day. Maybe we learn that by the time we're adult, I don't know. I never imagined saying, you know what? Every single Nerf bullet I see from here on goes in the trash, right? Like, who have I become? My 10-year-old self would hate me. Who put the skateboard there? Listen, Fozzie can't have babies. Fozzie's our dog. Fozzie can't have babies anyway. He's a boy, right? Like the conversations we wander into. Is your room clean? Did you clean your room? Is it clean yet? If I walked in, would I say it's clean, right? And all the other versions along with that. Whose sock is this? I don't want your tongue out of your mouth. Don't sit on the dog. Don't sit on the rail. Don't climb on the wall. Put away the peanut butter. Like there are all kinds of things, just like random, mundane things, and in the midst of those, crazy things that we never thought we would imagine hearing ourselves say. And if you're like us in our family, and if you don't live with your family, or you live with some roommates or some friends or some other people, you just got to apply this in the way that makes sense in your world and in your life right now. But for us, there are times where I will speak to my family, or my family will speak to me in ways they would never speak to people outside of the house. Have you done this? Like, there'll be that moment where all of a sudden you're in an intense, what does Kevin call it? Intense fellowship, right? Where words are strong and they come with passion, right? And they're just coming out, and then all of a sudden the phone rings. Oh, hello, how are you? This is great. I'm so glad to hear from you. How are you doing, right? Like, we totally flip gears because there's a way we talk to our family, and there's a way sometimes that we talk outside of our family, right? Or we're in the midst of a conversation or trying to get rooms clean or Nerf bullets and trying not to kill the dog with those and everything else. And all of a sudden, the doorbell rings and we just flip gears, right? Tone of voice changes, posture changes, all that stuff changes. Like, whoa, we just change it. Is your family like this or just me? All right? Here's the thing. Sometimes that's a little crazy. Sometimes it reveals a little too much of us than we should probably reveal. And sometimes it's exactly right. Sometimes it's exactly right to speak to our families and those who matter the most to us in ways that are very different than the way we would speak to anyone else, someone we've just met, someone we're just acquaintances with, that we have an opportunity in our families to speak meaningful things in ways that no one else has the opportunity to do so. In fact, today what we're going to talk about, we're going to look at the scriptures, and here's what we're going to see, is that as families, we are uniquely positioned to speak meaningful things into one another's lives in ways that no one else can. That no one else can fill that role. And our hope is, if we look at the scriptures, is I think what God is calling us to, I think he's inviting us to not miss those opportunities, to look diligently and take every single opportunity to speak into our families in ways that matter. Because here's the thing, I'm coming to believe that people often ask the deepest questions to the people they're in the deepest relationship with. And that the most impactful words that we can speak into people's lives are ways that we help people answer those deepest questions of who they are. And what I'm beginning to believe as I raise 4 kids and I've been married, and as I think about my relationship with my parents and my family members and my brother, I think that family, and as I look at the scriptures, it's affirmed that family is in a unique position. A place to create the context where those deepest kinds of questions about lives, the things that we most want the answer to, that we can create space for that to be the place where those questions are asked and where we can speak the thing we've always wanted to say, right? For all the times we say mundane things, for all the times we say things we never thought we'd say, like, I brought you into the world and never mind. There are times where we can speak things that set our families on trajectories that matter, that set their lives on courses that help them toward answers to questions that matter the most. Like last week we talked about this. Every single one of us is asking all the time, whether we admit it or not, we're asking, who will go with us? Who's with me? Am I alone in this thing? And we talked about how Moses and Aaron were these brothers, and Aaron said, Moses, I'll go with you. You're stepping into this challenging thing. I'll go with you. I'll go with you. I'll go with you. And we want people to go with us. And our family's uniquely positioned, even if we don't live in the same place, to go with us, to encourage us, to believe in us, to speak courage. This week, the question we're going to try to tackle is this: what should I do? Every single one of us asks this question. We ask it in huge ways, like, what should I do with my life? Children are asking, we ask them all the time, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? And as we grow up, right, we're like 35, and we're like, hey, what do you think I should be when I grow up? And then we're 50, and what should I do when I grow up, right? Like, all the way along, there are these transitions. What school should I go to? What job should I take? Should I take this promotion? Should we move for that? How do I position myself in the military to be on the career course that I really want to be on? What do I do in terms of classes or sports? Should I join this team? Should I learn this instrument? All these kinds of things along in terms of the people that we become. We're asking this question: what should I do? And one of the things I think that we can say as a family with credibility that no one else could speak with is we can look at them and with absolute conviction say, you were made for this. When they're stepping into something that we know is so in line with who God's made them to be, we can speak with conviction and courage to them and say, yes, you were made for this. Now, for some of you here, you might just be checking out this whole church thing. You might be checking out this whole Jesus thing. You're not sure where you land on this. Maybe there's a God, maybe there's not. Maybe he cares, maybe he doesn't. Listen, wherever you're at, this is a place where you can continue to look at Jesus, and what you'll find out is he's awesome. But you should know that for us, what we do as followers of Jesus in this place at Canyon Ridge, we hold the scriptures high, and we believe what the scriptures say. Now, whether you believe that the world was created in millions of years or 10,000 years or 6 days, no matter where you land on that, and lots of us land in different places, what we believe to our core is that God did it. Okay? And as we look at the scripture in Genesis chapter 1, we find out that this statement that I've just made is loaded. You were made for this starts with, you were made. We believe that every single one of us was created intentionally with a purpose. In fact, from Genesis 1, this is a teaching for another day, but let me just give you the cliff notes. You ready? God put his people who he spoke into existence to reflect him. They put him in a place. And every single one of us lives in a place, in a context, in a situation. There's a setting. If you're a writer, we're in a setting. He put them in a place, a garden. He provided for them, gave them everything that they needed. God gave them provision. He gave them purpose. Right from the very beginning, man and woman had work to do. They had a role to fill that was pivotal. They were created to be contributors, not consumers. And then he gave them partnership. The only thing in creation before sin that was not good was that man was alone. And so he created a partner for him, that man and woman would live and build one another up and complement one another and speak life into one another and work together and be in a phenomenal partnership. And then above all of that, God gave us and these people his presence. He said, like Kevin said last week, I'll go with you. And so we believe that we operate on that assumption, that God puts us in a place, that he provides for us, that he gives us a purpose, and we're constantly living our way into that. And the more we live into that, the more life fills up. And that we have a partnership, that he puts us in the midst of people who help us. Particularly, I think the first place he puts us is families. And when that goes right, it's so good. It's so good. And when we miss opportunities, it's so sad. And it's so hard. And above all, he gives us his presence. And so here's the deal. We believe that we can look with conviction at our families and say, you were made for this, right? Because here's the thing. As families, we have this unique position to know some things about our family that other people don't. Because the truth is that every single person has a backstory. In fact, if you were to make awkward eye contact with like 47 people around you, you would not look at a single person who doesn't have a backstory. They came from somewhere. They came from some sort of family. They came from some part of the world, right? They have different circumstances that their family that they grew up in. They have different experiences and triumphs and victories and struggles and all these different things. Everybody has a backstory. For today, we're going to look at one character in the scriptures. Her name is Esther. In fact, you have to check out this story. People who don't even believe in God know how great and how literary this story is. It's so well written. There's twists, there's turns, there's violence, there's victory, there's all kinds of stuff. It's a great story. You got to check it out. Real quick, here's the backstory on Esther. On Esther in chapter 2, verse 7, it says this. This man, his name's Mordecai, we'll get to him in a minute. This man had a very beautiful and lovely young cousin, Hadassah, who was also called Esther. When her father and mother died, Mordecai adopted her into his family and raised her as his own daughter. So much character development in just a few sentences. What we find out is that by her name, she was a Jew. And what we know from the context of the story is she's not where she belongs. She was part of this group of people who are exiled, and they're in a land, they are foreigners in the land. They are in the minority, they are discriminated against, they are viewed differently than everyone else. Babylon had come in and conquered all these different lands, and it was this hodgepodge of all these different people put together, and no one mattered as much as the Babylonians. And so she already, by her nationality, by her ethnicity, was viewed as less. Right? And then on top of that, she's a female. And in this time and in this place, there's a very different view of females than what we see today. So we learn a lot about her story right away. She was a captive, an exile, like I said. On top of that, she was orphaned. Her parents died. We don't know how old she was when her parents died, but that's part of her backstory. It's a pivotal part of her backstory. But we also see that she was loved and adopted by an older cousin named Mordecai. That he was adopted into this family, she was adopted in and treated like a daughter, and she was able to grow in awesome, awesome ways. And on top of that, we see in 3 different words in this one verse that she was beautiful. In fact, one of the words has to do with shape, right? A little chauvinistic maybe, probably, but she had a beautiful shape, the scripture says, and that people were struck by how easy she was to get along with and how easy she was on the eyes. And all of this shapes her backstory, right? So think about this. Whose backstory do you know really, really well? There are people whose backstories you're familiar with. And here's what I'm thinking, is the more you know someone's backstory, the greater credibility you'd be able to say, you were made for this. The more you know about how they were made, where they came from, what they've been through, the more we would be able to say, you were made for this. On top of that, the more we can speak someone's language in a way that they understand with their values and their history, the greater credibility we would be able to speak to them and help them forward in their lives and say, you were made for this. Now think about it. Whose backstory do you know really well? Surely, okay, your own, that's a given. You don't have to write that one down. But your friends, you probably have some friends, people you know pretty well. But who do you know the best? Who are you uniquely positioned to know their backstory, to speak their language, to understand their history, to understand their values? We are all in a unique position to speak this into our families, so let's not miss it. Now, backstory doesn't determine everything. It doesn't define who we are. It doesn't dictate what our next steps are, but it influences who we've become and where we go from here. In fact, backstory is often a setup for what's next. So as we think about our families and these people who are always asking this question, what should I do next? We can think backstory is really going to help, which perfectly positions you. Backstory is often a setup for what's next. It's just the backdrop, right? And how beautiful is it when someone realizes all these pieces that were put in their life come together for a season in their life where they get to put it to use in just the right way. Have you ever met someone doing something and you looked at them and you're like, you were born to do that? It's beautiful. It's awesome. Have you ever seen someone who was doing something and you're like, you should never do that. That's such a bad idea. I was thinking about this week. Do you guys ever watch the show American Idol for a while? Right? We have all these shows where we judge people on TV. I just got online. If you just have 5 minutes to be miserable, go online and go to YouTube and type in American Idol fails. Because somewhere along the line, families missed the opportunity to do what we are talking about. Because some of these people, they put together performances that were like, you are amazing. That is beautiful. We've been watching So You Think You Can Dance lately. Don't judge me. They're really good at it. And you get to watch them do something they were made to do. But then you get on this thing like American Idol fails, and you watch these people who really believe they're going to make a record. And they start singing, and everybody immediately is like, no, wait, what? Someone somewhere didn't tell you the truth. You know what I'm saying? And that's all right. We're not all made the same. That's fine. But the more we know about someone's backstory, the backdrop of who they are, that someone should have been able to see this isn't the path for you, but there is a path for you. There is a calling for you. There is a purpose for you, and they could have spoken it in, but somebody missed the opportunity. Let's not miss it. Y'all with me? Family is perfectly positioned for this. And so try this out this week. Read Psalm 139. Psalm 139 is all about how God spoke us into existence. He's with us all the time. He knows us. He made us a particular way. just you reading it for you would give you so much peace and trust and confidence. And all the other voices trying to speak stuff into your world, God could speak directly to you about you and give you confidence and peace. And then in the very next breath, what you could do is realize that the exact same thing is true for every single person you'll meet and every single person in your family. And my hope is that for every single one of us, it'll motivate us to do these things with our family, to be present to them. Not just around, but like really present, like dialed in, to listen well to them, to reflect on their lives and think about their backstory and think along with them about what would be next. And above all, to pray for our people often. So try it out. Be present to, listen to, reflect on, and pray for your people, your family, your friends, the people who are closest to you. Do that as often as possible. In fact, we know that lots of people are disconnected from their families, and our city can be a pretty lonely place. That's why we're always pressing people and encouraging people and providing opportunities for people to get into groups where they can launch into that kind of community, where they can learn one another's backstory, where they can think about and pray and reflect on and spend time with so we can help each other forward. Because I think the family, like the biological family, the way God has created us, or the adopted family, the way God puts families together is the best place for us to do this. But the church family is the next place to be able to do that. Don't miss out on that. Be present with some people, because here's what we also believe around here. That not only did God make us originally for some grand thing, but he, long before we were even born, he spoke us into existence to do great things. Ephesians 2:10 says this, that we're God's artwork, we're his masterpiece, created anew in Christ Jesus to do the good that he planned for us long ago. Every single one of us. And we as families are perfectly positioned to help our families into that. Y'all with me so far? Hold on to this. Have I convinced us all that you're in a unique position yet? You know better than anybody else. You have an opportunity like no one else has. We have that opportunity with our families. Let's not miss it. Now, here's the thing, is we don't just think big picture. We don't just think, what should I do with my life like 30 years from now? Every single day and in all kinds of seasons, we have choices to make about what's next. Whether it's to take the promotion, whether it's how to deal with this awful boss at work, whether it's how do we deal with this drama in our neighborhood or this challenge in our family, we're always thinking about what is our next choice, how do we move forward? And so maybe we could also answer this question with people like this. Not just were you created to do this big thing, but also you're invited to do this specific thing. What if we could look to it in our family in those times where they're making choices? And because we know their backstory and we care a lot about them, we could look at it and say, oh yeah, you should totally take this invitation. Or hey, listen, I'm not sure it's time for that yet. Or have you thought about this? We could be in unique positions for this. In fact, this is where I really want to get into Esther quite a bit. This is the real-time version of the question, what do I do today? Because it's unique for every single one of us. And the beauty is that God helps us through all of that, no matter how unique. The truth is every single one of us has a context, right? Every single one of us, everyone has a context, a situation in which you live, challenges that you face, opportunities you'll be afforded, things you wish would be true that aren't true yet. Every single one of us has a context. Not only do we all have a backstory, but we have a context. And what I'm trying to say is that our backstory sets us up for the context that we're in, and that family is uniquely positioned to help us live that context super well. In fact, let me catch you up on the story of Esther. You got to read it this week. I'm telling you, it's a phenomenal story. Esther was this girl, like I said, beautiful girl, born at just the right time in this kingdom. Now, in the time that she was born, there was this guy, his name was Xerxes. He was king. And this king had a queen named Vashti. And the king says, hey, I'm having a great party with my friends. I want to show off how beautiful my queen is. And so he calls for the queen and says, hey, queen, come show everybody how beautiful you are. And queen says, nah. And here's the thing. As the king, he didn't like that. And he gets ticked. And when kings throw fits, it's like a royal fit. And so what he does is he says, you know what? You're not queen anymore. You're out. And here's what I'm going to do, because I'm super mature. I'm going to find all the beautiful women. I'm going to find as many beautiful women, and whoever gives me the most pleasure, she's going to become the queen. Okay, so you putting this together yet? King who likes beautiful young girls wants one to be his queen. And here's Esther, a beautiful young girl. And so he gathers up all these beautiful women, Esther is one of those women. She's in captivity, doesn't really have a choice. She steps into this, and so what happens, long story short, is she becomes queen. Among hundreds of young girls, she becomes the queen in an exiled land where she doesn't even belong. She is now the queen of this land. Now, alongside this, there's this guy named Mordecai. Remember, Mordecai is the guy who adopted Esther, and Mordecai was an official in the land. In the midst of this, there was while all of this is going on, somebody plots to kill Xerxes, but Mordecai finds out. He happens to be the cousin of Esther, so he tells Esther about the plot to kill the king. She tells the king is saved, Mordecai is a hero, and the two guys who are plotting to kill the king get killed on poles. If you're into violence, guys, you got to read this, okay? Listen, they're not even the only guys who get impaled on poles. Check it out, right? And so here's the thing. Mordecai rescues the king because Esther ends up being the queen. It's the only reason he's in position to do that. At the same time, there's this other guy who comes to power, the second in command behind Xerxes. His name is Haman. Haman is kind of he's a jerk. And so here's the thing. He's super proud, and when people get really proud, they tell people to do stuff that make them feel good about themselves. And so Haman says, you know what? I'm kind of a big deal. I want everyone to bow down when I come around. And so he makes all the officials of the land bow down anytime he comes around. Except there was this one guy who wasn't really into bowing down to people other than God. His name was Mordecai. And so Mordecai refuses to bow down. Well, Haman, because like I said, he's kind of royalty at this point, and when royal fit, right? So what he decides to do is like, you know what? I'm going to get the king. I'm going to find out what nationality this guy is. Turns out he's a Jew. And so, you know what? I'm going to get the king to write a decree that sometime in the next year, there'll be one day where anybody can attack and kill any Jew that they want, and they won't get in trouble for it. Right? It's like the purge, right? And so here's the thing. This happens. He gets the king to write this law so that all Jews will be killed on this day. He rolls some dice, basically, to find out when that should be, and it's about 11 months away. Why he did that, I have no idea. But 11 months later, all the Jews can be killed with no consequence. Mordecai's kind of freaking out. And so Mordecai, does he know anyone in power who could help influence this to not be the case? Anyone at all that he might be connected to? There's this girl named Esther, right? Who he happened to have raised, who is the queen. And so we step into this particular situation, all this backstory with Esther and with Mordecai, and then there's this specific situation. And here's what unfolds. In Esther chapter 4, Mordecai is really, really sad. And because Esther and Mordecai are connected, Esther says, hey, go find out why Mordecai's upset. And Mordecai sends a message. He says, look, there's this whole plot. Esther didn't even know about it. There's this whole plot. All of our people are going to be wiped out. You got to do something about it. Right? And so Esther, in the midst of all these things swirling around, this is what happens. In verse 10, Esther told this messenger to go back. This is verse 10 of chapter 4. Esther told this messenger to go back and relay the message to Mordecai. Look, all the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for more than 30 days. So the messenger gave Esther's message to Mordecai. Basically, Mordecai brings his stuff to Esther, and Esther says, I'm afraid. This is really, like, I could die doing this. Now, this is a unique opportunity, right? What do I do? Do you hear the question that Esther's asking? What do I do? And Mordecai, in a unique position, just like us as families, says this in verse 13. Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in a place you will escape when all the other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief from the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this? Imagine this. This young, beautiful girl, unmarried, she becomes queen, and we don't know how exactly long it is, but it's not many years. She's still basically a teenager, and she's put in this position of saying, what do I do? And wouldn't it be great if there was someone in Esther's life who knew her backstory, who understood where she came from, who knew all of her values, where she came from, what she was about, knew everything that everybody else didn't know? It would be really great because that person would be in a perfect position to help her make a choice. Wouldn't it be great if someone other than Esther could help her make that decision, because sometimes in decision making, we're so thick in the details, we can't see it differently. You know what I'm saying? Like football season just started yesterday, praise the Lord. And so all of us who care about football, we watch football on our TV, and we look at them and are like, why did you turn that way? That's ridiculous. There's all this space over here. What are you doing? Why would you call that play? That's ridiculous. We question all these things. You know why we do that? Because we're watching from a camera from our couch. We're not the ones with our helmet on with a 300-pound person running a 4.5 40 at our head. You know what I'm saying? That's why they did it. They're neck deep in the situation, but us from a different vantage point are able to see things differently. And how valuable is it for us when we're in the thick of life, swirling around us like this teenage girl trying to make a decision of a lifetime? How great is it to have someone who not only knows her backstory, but sees things from a little bit different viewpoint? Man, wouldn't it be great if you had somebody in your life with that kind of vantage point? And on top of all that, how great would it be if that person cared about you and loved you, that they loved you enough that you could create a place where they could be vulnerable and you could be vulnerable and express fears just like Esther did? And wouldn't it be great if we could count on people around us to tell us the truth, even if it was really hard, even if it was like, hey, Esther, if you dodge this, you're going to die. That's the truth. I know you don't want to hear it, but I'm going to tell you. Wouldn't it be great if she had someone who could tell her the truth? And wouldn't it be great if she had someone who would invite her to do challenging things that she's not sure she could do, but with God's help, she could probably do? And wouldn't it be great if she had someone who said, I'll go with you? Can you think of anybody in the story who could play that role? Anybody perfectly positioned to know her backstory, to see from a different viewpoint, to love her and go with her? Mordecai, her cousin, her family. The exact same thing is true for each one of us. We can see things from a different viewpoint. We know backstory. We love them. We'll create space for them to be vulnerable and be open and honest. We'll go with them. We'll challenge them to more. We are in perfect position to help our family forward if we'll pay attention and not miss our chances. Because here's the thing, is that timing's everything. Did you catch that? Did you catch that at the end of the story? Hey, what if God made you queen for such a time as this? Hey, listen, if you're quiet in a time like this, God will do something else, but you have an opportunity here. You're invited to this. He looks at her and basically says, you were made for this, and you're invited to this. Timing's everything. How do we know what time it is? Our family can help us read the times really, really well. In fact, in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says this: for everything there's a season. Everything. A time for every activity under heaven. Meaning anything in our lives, there's a season. It's time to be born, time to die, time to fight, time to not fight, time to hug, time to not hug. All kinds of stuff is in that list because there's a time for everything. And sometimes in the swirling craziness of our lives, we don't know what time it is. But thank God there's some family around us who know our backstory, who love us, who will speak the truth, and who can see from a different viewpoint to help us know what time it is. What if we were all great at helping our family know what time it is? Because there's this other thing that's really the heart of all of it. Are you ready? For those of us who follow Jesus, for those of us who believe God created us for anything at all, that he spoke us into existence, and that he invites us into good things, here's the thing that we know is always true. That God is always up to something. He is always up to something. God works in everything, whether it's good, bad, whether he caused it or it's just the consequence of sin and pain and other junk in the world. God is always up to something. Can I mess with you for just a second? You got to read Esther. You know what you won't find in Esther at any place along the way? Not once. You won't find it one time. You ready? You won't find God's name one time. Not a single time in the entire book is God mentioned specifically. And you're all like, what are we even talking about then? But here's the truth, is this book was written in exile where writing a book with God's name in it was not going to help anybody. And so maybe that's the reason he left God's name out of it. But you know what's one way to draw attention to something that should be obvious in a story? Never talk about it. You know why? Because all the way along, people are waiting for it. over and over and over. Here's the beauty of this story. Here's what I love about it. Even if you don't follow Jesus, I think you'll see this. If you were to read through this story, you'll see God everywhere and never hear his name. He's all over the place. Like, just a few examples. Are you ready? Just so happens that Esther's in exile and is born a beautiful young woman and is available for marriage. Isn't it crazy that at just the right time, the king throws a fit, she just happens to be there. And Mordecai just happens to be a king's official so that Esther could be connected and be one of those 100 women and maybe become king. Isn't it crazy that Mordecai just happens to be the guy who hears about the plot to kill the king, and he just happens to be connected to Esther, who just happens to be the king's wife so that he can rescue him? And then, in fact, if you read on in the story, there's this phenomenal thing that unfolds. I got to give you the cliff notes because it's just so good. This guy, Haman, he just happens to have a conversation at the same time the king reads a book, and you're all like, who cares? But here's the thing. Haman's conversation was with his friends, and Haman loved to talk about how great he was. He's just such a good guy. Everybody should bow down to him. I can't believe Mordecai doesn't bow down to me. He's throwing a fit. He's basically whining like a 2-year-old. And his friends say, you know what? Just get the king to kill him. Get the king to give you stuff and kill him. He's like, yeah, that's what I'll do. But at the same time he's having that conversation, the king says, I'm bored. I want to read some history. And so he reads the records of when Mordecai saved his life. So at the same time Haman is thinking how great he is, the king is thinking how great Mordecai is. And so it just so happens that Haman walks into the king and says, and the king has a question for him right away. And the king says, hey, Haman, what should a king do for someone who didn't get a reward that they deserve, but just did such a phenomenal, important kingdom-changing thing? What should somebody do? And Haman's like, that's me. No, it's not. He goes, you know what, that king should just give him tons of riches, tons of land, and tons of power. And the king goes, you're right, I'm going to do it. Go get Mordecai. He's the guy. And Haman's like, what? And so Mordecai shows up, and all of this comes out about Haman, and guess where Haman ends up? Impaled on a pole. If you like revenge, you gotta read this story, okay? It's just crazy over and over and over. Just so happens, and it's crazy. Just right under the surface, God is orchestrating all kinds of stuff. Now, Mordecai and Esther did not do everything God honoring because they're people just like us. They're just jacked up, they're messed up, they didn't do everything right. But God set up things all the way through the story. But don't miss this. This is the heart of the whole thing. Are you ready? God set up everything for Esther to be in just the right spot. And God set up Mordecai just next to her in her family to help her see it. And God orchestrated all of it, but Mordecai didn't miss his chance. Mordecai took the opportunity to speak into his family member with all the backstory, with all the love, with all the different perspective, in the exact same way that all of us can help see the very thing God is calling us into. Mordecai didn't miss his chance. My question for you with your family is, what would you give to not miss your chance? There are things our families need to hear from us. And we got to be present, and we got to listen, and we got to not miss the opportunity that we've been given with our family to speak the most important things to the most important questions in our families. And so do this. You ready? Real quick, finish up. Here it is. Number one, take time, create space to explore the big question of what's next together. No matter what age your kids are, no matter whether it's with your kids or with your siblings, get lunch, get on the phone with your parents. How great would it be, parents and grandparents, for your kids to thank you for all the great things about you and say, you know what, there are things yet that God has for you, and they would invest time and energy in helping you be who you were created to be. And for your kids, if they're young, no matter what their dreams are, exploring all those different things and letting them try and fail and making sure that they should or shouldn't end up on American Idol, like tell them the truth all the way along the way. Or teenagers, like those of you who have teenagers, I know they think they're too cool for you. I know they roll their eyes at you. I know they disrespect you. I know they challenge you. But I'll tell you this, you have to lean in. It is not the season to lean back. Yeah, you go from authority to peer in some ways in that season. There's a transition, and it's dicey and it's tough, but you gotta lean in. Find their restaurant, invest $50 in a ridiculous meal that they never thought they could have so that you could buy 2 hours, maybe to change the trajectory of their life. To sit with them long enough, to listen and hear what they're up to and look at them and with absolute conviction say, you were made for this. Go for it. I'll go with you. It would mean the world to them. Now, we gave you an opportunity earlier because some of us don't live with families, and so maybe this is the right time, maybe it's not, I don't know. But some of you guys filled out a card because you need to get connected to some people. You're like, Drew, I don't have anybody who will do that for me, and I don't even know who I can do that for. That's why we do life groups. It's not the only way to be in community, but it's a good one. And so some people are going to pass some buckets. If you filled out one of those cards, please drop it in the bucket. Get some people in your world who will watch your life and hear your backstory and cheer you on and go with you. And you can be the same in their life, to hear their backstory, watch their life, go with them, cheer them on, care for them, and help them forward. So be crazy, take a chance, drop it in the bucket. For all of us, though, even when we're exploring these questions, maybe what you could do is this. Don't miss a chance to tell your people what you see in them. Write them a card, sit them down in the most awkward conversation you ever had and just said, look, I'm going to tell you everything that's awesome about you. Or sit them down and say, listen, here's all the things I'm grateful for about you. That'll help them shape those things that are next. Tell people what you see in them and what you see for them, because we're not always great at seeing ourselves. Number 3, encourage those you love to take bold, faithful steps. I don't have time, but if I had time, there's a hobby horse I would get on for a while, because I think sometimes parents, like I find myself and people around trying to do this, we spend way too much time protecting, and we should spend way more time preparing. Because our kids are capable of phenomenal things, and instead of guarding and protecting all the time, we need to coach them and prepare them to step into really difficult things, because God has great things in mind for you, but it will require great faith, and it will require at times great risk. But our God is greater than all of it. And so we want to encourage people to try hard things. And maybe they break an arm, or maybe they fail. But we are there when it's done, and we go with them, encourage people into challenging things. Mordecai had no problem asking Esther to risk her life. In fact, she said, hey, listen, why don't you guys pray for me, and I'll pray for the next 3 days. We'll not eat anything. We'll just pray and ask God, and then I'll go see the king. And if I die, I die. Where does the courage in a teenage girl come from like that? You know where? People who went with her. A God who went with her. People who weren't afraid to call her into tough things. Because you and your family are capable of more than you can imagine when you go with God. And finally, this is so important, call back to last week, go with them. Go with them. Cheer them on. Don't cut them loose, go with them. Not like helicopter, hover, bulldozer parent. I'm just saying go with them. Encourage them. Go to the game. Cheer them on. Give them honest feedback. Yeah, I know, it's a 7-0 loss. Well, this is how it goes. We're going to figure this out. You'll get better. Enjoy the game. Like all these different things along the way that we can coach them into. In fact, just for 1 second as we finish, I want you to think, who have been the people along the way that have pointed you in the most meaningful directions? Maybe not in these words, but they looked at you and said, you can do this. You were made for this. You're invited to this. Do this thing. I can remember a 5th grade coach who looked down the bench and said, Drew, go. And in just a tiny moment, he believed in me. And that did something in me. And that's just 5th grade basketball. Who cares? High school football. Who cares? It's not even that important. But somebody said, I believe in you. You can do this. And it mattered. Like a youth pastor when I was 16 years old looked at me and said, who had walked with me for a couple or 3 years, knew my backstory, cared about me, looked at me and said, Drew, maybe someday you'd make a great youth pastor. Pointed me in a totally different direction. Or like the day my dad, we were building his house. He said, look, Drew, you've been working on my construction crew for every summer for the last 6 years. We were building his house, not somebody else's house. We're building my dad's house. And he looks at me and says, I want you to do all the wiring in the house. Figure it out. Tell people what you need. Buy what you need. Do the whole thing. And I'm like, dude, some people are going to die. But he believed in me. He called me forward. This youth minister and my dad at the same time saying, you know what, I think full-time ministry would be a great idea when I move from teaching to ministry. And then this whole season here at Canyon Ridge, listen, people who know you, who know your backstory, who believe in you, and with conviction can say, you were made for this. And there's no one positioned like a family member to be able to do that. Let's not miss our chances with our family. Would you stand and pray with me? And so, God, what an honor. What an honor that you let us speak meaningful things into people's lives at all. But what a cool opportunity you give us with families. God, help us not miss it. Help us love people around us well enough to watch and pray and listen and talk and all those things to help people forward. God, you're always up to something, and sometimes it's just under the surface. Help us see it. Help us have eyes to see above all what you're up to.